My name is Addie, and I am 56 years old. Last Christmas, my daughter poured a full glass of red wine over my head in front of everyone I love. She screamed that I had ruined everything, but instead of crying, I smiled, because in that moment, I knew exactly what I was going to do. Before I tell you what happened next, I would love to know where you are watching from. If you have ever had to make a difficult choice about family, please hit that like button and subscribe to this channel. Now let me tell you how a single moment changed everything between a mother and daughter. Let me take you back to understand how we got here. My life with my late husband David was something out of a storybook, or at least that is what I always believed. We met in Phoenix, Arizona when I was just 23 and he was 25. I was working my first job in real estate, showing a property downtown, and he walked in wearing a hard hat because he was the engineer inspecting the building next door. He had gotten lost looking for the correct address. We laughed about it, and 2 years later we were married. For 32 years, David and I built a beautiful life together. We had 2 children. Stephanie came first, and she was David's princess from the moment she was born. 3 years later came Kyle, quieter and more independent, but just as loved. I worked my way up in real estate and became quite successful. David thrived as a civil engineer. We bought a large house in a good neighborhood with a backyard, perfect for Christmas lights and summer barbecues. Christmas was always our favorite time of year. Every December, David would spend an entire weekend stringing lights around the roof while I baked gingerbread cookies and played carols on the piano. Stephanie would make paper snowflakes and tape them to every window. Kyle would help his father untangle the light strings and hand him tools. When the grandchildren came along, Ethan and Sophie David would dress up as Santa Claus with a pillow stuffed under his red suit. Those were the days when everything felt safe and permanent. 5 years ago, David collapsed in the garage while working on his car. The paramedics said it was a massive heart attack. He was 58 years old. One moment he was there humming along to the radio, and the next he was gone. I have never felt pain like that before. It was as if someone had reached inside my chest and removed something vital. I could not breathe properly for months. Stephanie took it the hardest. She had always been a daddy's girl. At the funeral, she clung to me and sobbed so hard her whole body shook. Kyle grieved quietly as he always did, keeping his sorrow private. But Stephanie, she wore her pain on the outside. She visited me almost every day for the first year. She would bring Ethan, who was 2 at the time, and little Sophie, who was just a baby. We would sit in the living room and talk about David, remembering the good times, sometimes crying together. For 2 years, I did not even think about dating. The thought felt impossible, even wrong. I focused on work, though I had scaled back my hours. I spent time with my children and grandchildren. I kept David's study exactly as he had left it. His reading glasses still on the desk next to a book he never finished. At night, I would lie in our bed on my side, leaving his side untouched. The house felt enormous and empty. Then 3 years after David passed, I attended a charity gala for the local children's hospital. I had always supported their fundraisers, and that year they were honoring a long-time donor. I was seated at a table with several other attendees, and that is where I met Walter. He was 60 years old, recently retired from his career as an architect, and also attending the gala alone. We started talking during dinner about the hospital, about Phoenix, about everything and nothing. Walter told me his wife had died from cancer 6 years earlier. He understood what it meant to lose someone you planned to grow old with. There was no awkwardness between us, no pressure. We simply talked like 2 people who had walked similar painful roads. At the end of the evening, he asked if I would like to meet for coffee sometime. I surprised myself by saying yes. Those coffee meetings became regular, once a week, then twice. Walter had a dry sense of humor that caught me off guard and made me laugh when I had forgotten I could. He listened when I talked about David never trying to compete with his memory. He shared stories about his wife Elizabeth and how much he still missed her. We were two people learning to live again after loss. After 6 months, our friendship deepened into something more. I found myself thinking about Walter when we were apart. I looked forward to our dinners, our long walks around the botanical gardens, the way he would reach for my hand. It felt different from what I had with David, and that was okay. I was not trying to replace my husband. I was simply allowing myself to feel happiness again. When Walter and I decided to make our relationship official, I knew I needed to tell my children. Kyle was easy. He came over for dinner one evening and I explained that I had been seeing someone. His face lit up. He said he was happy for me and asked when he could meet Walter. 2 weeks later, Walter joined us for Sunday brunch, and he and Kyle spent an hour talking about golf and vintage cars. Kyle called me that night and said, "Mom, he seems like a really good man. Dad would want you to be happy." Stephanie's reaction was the complete opposite. I invited her and her family over on a Tuesday evening. Walter brought gifts for Ethan and Sophie. Beautiful wooden toys he had seen at an artisan market. The children loved them immediately, but Stephanie barely looked at the gifts. Her face was cold, her responses clipped. When Walter tried to make conversation, asking about her work in marketing, she answered in 1 or 2 word sentences. Her husband Brad tried to ease the tension, smiling and engaging with Walter, but Stephanie sat rigid in her chair. After dinner, when Walter left to give us privacy, Stephanie confronted me in the kitchen. Her voice shook as she asked how long this had been going on. I told her 6 months. She stared at me like I had slapped her. "Dad has only been gone 4 years," she said. "How can you move on so fast?" I tried to explain that 4 years was not fast, that I had grieved deeply, that I was allowed to find companionship again. But she shook her head and left with her family without saying goodbye. The weeks following that dinner were difficult. Stephanie stopped calling as often. When I reached out, her responses were brief and cold. She declined invitations to lunch. When I asked if I could see the grandchildren, she made excuses about busy schedules. I felt her pulling away, and it broke my heart all over again. A month later, Walter and I decided to get engaged. We were sitting on my back patio one evening watching the sunset, and he said he wanted to spend whatever years we had left together. I said yes without hesitation. We planned a small engagement party and invited close family and friends. I called both my children to share the news before the party. Kyle was thrilled. He congratulated me and Walter and said he would be there with his girlfriend Hannah. But when I called Stephanie, the silence on the other end of the line felt heavy. Finally, she said, "I will come, but I am not happy about this." I asked her to please try to be open-minded to give Walter a chance. She hung up without answering. The engagement party was at my house on a Saturday afternoon. About 20 people attended. My sister and brother David's siblings, Joan and Paul, several close friends, and my children. Kyle arrived early with Hannah, who brought a beautiful bouquet of flowers. They both hugged Walter and me. Stephanie arrived late with Brad, Ethan, and Sophie. She did not smile. She barely made eye contact. When Walter and I stood to make a toast and announce our engagement officially, most people clapped and cheered. Joan hugged me with tears in her eyes and said David would be so happy I had found love again. Paul shook Walter's hand and welcomed him to the family. But Stephanie stood in the corner with her arms crossed. When I walked over to her with the engagement ring to show her, she glanced at it and said, "It is very nice," in a tone that suggested the opposite. Later that evening, after most guests had left, Stephanie pulled me aside. Kyle and Walter were outside with Brad and the children. She looked at me with tears in her eyes and said, "You are replacing Dad." I tried to take her hand, but she pulled away. "I am not replacing anyone," I said gently. "Walter is a different person. I loved your father with everything I had, but he is gone. He is not coming back. Stephanie's voice rose. So you just forget him. Move on like he never existed. I felt my own frustration building. That is not fair, Stephanie. I carry your father in my heart every single day. But I am 56 years old. I do not want to spend the rest of my life alone, frozen in grief. She wiped her eyes roughly. What about us? What about his memory? What about everything we were as a family? I tried to stay calm. We will always be a family. Nothing changes that. But I need you to understand that I deserve happiness. Your father would want that for me. Stephanie shook her head. You do not know what he would want. You are just doing what is easy for you. Before I could respond, she called for Brad and the children. We are leaving, she announced. She walked out without hugging me goodbye. I stood in my living room watching her car pull away, feeling like I had lost my daughter. The following months were torture. Stephanie refused to answer my calls. She responded to my text messages with 1 or 2 words, if at all. When I asked to see Ethan and Sophie, she said they were busy with school activities. I sent gifts for their birthdays and received no thank you messages. Kyle tried to mediate, calling his sister and telling her she was being unreasonable, but she would not listen. You did not know Dad like I did, she told him. You do not understand what she is doing. I talked to Joan and Paul David's siblings. They both reassured me that I was doing nothing wrong. David loved you so much, Joan said one afternoon over tea. He would be devastated to see you alone and miserable. You moving forward with your life honors him, it does not erase him. Paul agreed. Stephanie is holding on to her grief in an unhealthy way. She needs to let go for her own sake. But despite their support, I felt the loss of my relationship with Stephanie acutely. I missed her. I missed her laugh, her stories about the children, our shopping trips together. I missed being her mother in the way I had been before. Walter tried to comfort me, but even he could see how much her rejection hurt. Maybe she just needs more time, he would say. I wanted to believe him. As the months went on, I realized something else was happening. Stephanie was not just grieving her father. She was angry at me for being happy. She wanted me to stay in the past with her, to keep David's memory alive by remaining his widow forever. But I could not do that. I had loved David deeply, but I was still alive. I still had years ahead of me. I deserved to fill those years with joy, not just sorrow. One night I stood in David's old study. I had finally started packing up his things, not to erase him, but to make space for my new life. I held his reading glasses in my hand and talked to him as if he were there. I hope I am doing the right thing, I whispered. I hope you understand. I will always love you, but I need to move forward. In my heart, I felt like he would have understood. David had never wanted me to be sad. He had always encouraged me to live fully. By the time November arrived, I had not spoken to Stephanie in nearly 6 months. It was the longest we had ever gone without real communication. The silence weighed on me constantly. I would see something funny and think about calling her, then remember she would not answer. I would buy something for the grandchildren and wonder if I should send it, knowing it might go unacknowledged. The distance felt unbearable. Walter suggested I do something to bring the family together. Christmas is coming, he said one evening as we sat in my kitchen. Why not host a big family gathering, invite everyone? Make it impossible for Stephanie to say no. I thought about it for several days. Christmas had always been our most important holiday. Even in the years after David died, we had gathered together honoring his memory while celebrating as a family. Maybe this year could be a turning point. I decided to plan the biggest Christmas celebration I had hosted in years. I would invite Kyle and Hannah Stephanie and her family Joan and Paul and their spouses and a few close friends. It would be a chance for everyone to come together for Stephanie to see that Walter was part of our lives now, and for us to rebuild what had been broken. I spent hours planning the menu, thinking about decorations and making lists of gifts for everyone. In mid-November, I sent Stephanie an email. I kept it warm but simple. Dear Stephanie, I am hosting Christmas at my house this year. I would love for you, Brad, Ethan, and Sophie to join us. It has been too long since we have all been together. The children must miss their grandmother. I miss you. Please come. Love, Mum. I hit send and waited, my stomach churning with anxiety. A week passed with no response. I checked my email obsessively. Finally, just when I had given up hope, a short message appeared. We will be there. That was all it said. No warmth, no details, just confirmation. But it was enough. I felt a surge of hope. Maybe Christmas would heal the rift between us. Maybe seeing the family together, seeing how happy Walter made me, would help Stephanie understand. I threw myself into preparations. I bought a massive Christmas tree and spent an entire day decorating it with ornaments collected over decades. Some were handmade by Stephanie and Kyle when they were children. I hung lights along the staircase and placed wreaths on every door. I planned a menu that included all of Stephanie's favorite dishes from childhood. Roast turkey with herb butter, mashed sweet potatoes, green bean casserole with the crispy onions she loved, and pumpkin pie with fresh whipped cream. I bought thoughtful gifts for everyone. For Ethan, a set of building blocks he had been asking for. For Sophie, a beautiful doll with accessories. For Stephanie, I chose an elegant silver bracelet I had seen her admiring months earlier in a jewelry store window. I wrapped each gift carefully, writing personal notes on the cards. For Stephanie's card, I wrote, I love you always. I hope this Christmas brings us closer. Mum. Kyle came over several times to help me prepare. He was excited about the gathering and optimistic about Stephanie. I talked to her last week, he told me while we hung garland. She said she is coming, but she is not thrilled about Walter being there. I sighed. I know, but this is my home. Walter is part of my life now. She needs to accept that. Kyle nodded. I agree, Mum. I just hope she can be civil. Walter was also preparing. He wanted to make a good impression on everyone, especially Stephanie. He bought gifts for the whole family. For me, he had a special surprise, he told me one evening. He showed me a small velvet box. Inside was a stunning diamond necklace, delicate and beautiful. I want to give this to you on Christmas, he said, in front of your family. I want them to see how much I love you. I felt a flutter of anxiety. Are you sure that is a good idea? Stephanie might not react well. Walter took my hands in his. She needs to see that I am serious about you, that I am not going away. Maybe if she sees how committed I am, she will accept this. I wanted to believe him, but something in my gut warned me this could backfire. Still, I agreed. Walter deserved to express his love openly. The 2 days before Christmas, I was a whirlwind of activity. I cleaned every room, cooked dishes that could be reheated, arranged flowers, and set the table with my finest china. Kyle and Hannah came early on Christmas Eve to help with last-minute tasks. Walter was there too, setting up extra chairs in the dining room. The house smelled like pine and cinnamon and roasted nuts. Everything looked perfect. On Christmas Eve night, I stood alone in the living room, looking at the tree with all its lights twinkling. I thought about past Christmases with David, how he would stand in this same spot with his arm around me. Both of us tired but happy after a long day of preparation. I felt a pang of sadness, but also gratitude. I had loved David deeply, and now I had a chance to love again. I hoped with all my heart that tomorrow would go well. Christmas morning arrived bright and cold. I woke up early, my stomach tight with nerves. Walter had gone home the night before to give me space to prepare, but he arrived at 9 in the morning with pastries and coffee. Kyle and Hannah showed up shortly after to help with final preparations. The three of them worked together in the kitchen while I set out appetizers and checked the dining room one more time. Guests began arriving around 11. Joan and Paul came with their spouses carrying bottles of wine and cheerful greetings. A few close friends arrived next, people who had known our family for years. The house filled with conversation and laughter. Christmas music played softly in the background. Children's voices echoed as Ethan and Sophie were expected soon. Everything felt festive and warm. At 12:15, the doorbell rang. My heart jumped. I smoothed my red dress and walked to the door. When I opened it, there stood Stephanie, with Brad, Ethan, and Sophie. Ethan, now 7 years old, had grown so much since I last saw him. Sophie, 5, had her mother's dark hair and David's blue eyes. They both shouted, "Grandma!" and ran to hug me. I knelt down and wrapped my arms around them, blinking back tears. When I stood up, I tried to hug Stephanie. She stood stiff, her arms barely moving to return the embrace. "Merry Christmas, Mum," she said in a flat voice. Brad smiled at me warmly and handed me a bottle of wine. "Merry Christmas, Addie. The house looks beautiful." I thanked him and led them inside. Ethan and Sophie ran immediately to the Christmas tree, marveling at the lights and presents underneath. Walter appeared from the kitchen, wiping his hands on a towel. He walked over with a genuine smile. "Merry Christmas, Stephanie. It is good to see you again." Stephanie gave a tiny nod but said nothing. Brad shook Walter's hand firmly. "Merry Christmas, Walter. How have you been?" The two men exchanged pleasantries, while Stephanie stood silently beside them, her expression unreadable. The tension was palpable, but I tried to ignore it. I introduced Stephanie's family to the other guests, and everyone settled into the living room. Kyle played with Ethan and Sophie, showing them a remote-controlled car he had brought as a gift. Joan engaged Brad in conversation about his work. Walter talked with Paul about a renovation project. I moved between groups, offering drinks and snacks, trying to keep everything flowing smoothly. At 1 o'clock, I called everyone to the dining room for lunch. The table was laden with food, everything golden and steaming. People found their seats. Walter sat beside me at one end of the table. Kyle sat at the other end with Hannah. Stephanie sat directly across from Walter with Brad next to her and the children on either side. Joan, Paul, and the others filled in the remaining seats. As we passed, dishes around the conversation remained light. People complimented the food. Paul told a funny story about getting lost on a road trip. Kyle shared news about a promotion at work. Walter contributed a humorous anecdote about a disastrous golf game, and most people laughed. But I noticed Stephanie did not laugh. She ate quietly, her fork scraping against her plate. Halfway through the meal, Paul raised his glass. "I want to make a toast," he announced. Everyone paused. "To Addie for bringing us all together, and to Walter, it is wonderful to have you here. David would have appreciated you making Addie happy. He always wanted the best for her." People murmured agreement and clinked glasses. I saw Joan nod with tears in her eyes, but then Stephanie set her fork down hard. The clatter was loud in the sudden quiet. She looked directly at Paul. Her face flushed. "How do you know what Dad would have wanted?" Her voice cut through the room. Paul looked startled. "I just meant that David loved your mother. He would want her to be happy." Stephanie's jaw tightened. "You did not know him like I did. None of you did." The room fell silent. I felt my chest tighten. "Steph, please," I said softly. "Not today." Stephanie turned her gaze to me but said nothing more. She picked up her fork again, but the damage was done. The atmosphere had shifted. People ate quietly, avoiding eye contact. Brad whispered something to Stephanie, trying to calm her. She shook her head slightly but remained silent. After the meal, we moved back to the living room for gifts. Ethan and Sophie were thrilled, bouncing with excitement. Kyle played Santa, handing out presents to everyone. The children tore into their gifts, squealing with delight. The adults exchanged presents more sedately, thanking each other politely. When Kyle handed Stephanie the gift from me, she opened it slowly. The silver bracelet gleamed in the light. She looked at it for a long moment. "Thanks," she said flatly, setting it aside without putting it on. I felt a stab of disappointment, but forced a smile. More gifts were opened. Hannah received a scarf from Joan. Paul got a book from Walter. The pile under the tree shrank. Then Walter stood up. The room quieted as everyone looked at him. "I have one more gift," he said, his voice steady. "For Addie." My heart began to pound. I knew what was coming. Walter reached into his pocket and pulled out the small velvet box. He walked over to where I sat and knelt down on one knee. Gasps and murmurs rippled through the room. He opened the box, revealing the diamond necklace. "Addie," he said. His eyes locked on mine. "You have brought light back into my life. I want to spend every Christmas with you for the rest of my life." Tears blurred my vision. "Walter, it is beautiful." He stood and carefully fastened the necklace around my neck, then kissed my cheek. The room erupted in applause. Kyle cheered. Joan and Paul clapped enthusiastically. Friends called out congratulations. Hannah took a photo with her phone. I touched the necklace, overwhelmed with emotion. Walter squeezed my hand. Everything felt perfect. But then I saw Stephanie. She was standing rigid, her face pale. Her hands clenched into fists at her sides. She stared at Walter and me with an expression I had never seen before, something between disgust and fury. I felt a cold dread wash over me. Stephanie stood frozen for several seconds, while everyone else continued to celebrate. Then she spoke, her voice shaking but loud enough to cut through the noise. "Are you serious right now?" The room went silent. People turned to look at her. Walter straightened, still holding my hand. "Stephanie," he began, but she cut him off. "You do not know anything." Her voice rose. "You do not know my father. You do not know this family. You are just some stranger who showed up and thinks he can replace everything we had." Brad stood up quickly and put a hand on her arm. "Steph, maybe we should go outside." She yanked her arm away from him. "No, I am not going anywhere." I stood up, my legs shaking. "Steph, please calm down." She whirled to face me. "Calm down? You want me to calm down while you parade this stranger in front of all of us? While you let him give you expensive jewelry like he is trying to buy his way into our family?" Her voice cracked. "How can you do this? How can you disrespect Dad like this?" Tears streamed down her face now. Ethan and Sophie started crying, frightened by their mother's outburst. Hannah quickly took them into the other room. Kyle stood up, his face a mixture of shock and anger. Joan covered her mouth with her hand. I felt everyone's eyes on us, the entire room holding its breath. Walter stepped forward. "Stephanie, I understand this is difficult. I am not trying to replace your father. I know I never could. But I care deeply about your mother, and I—" She cut him off again, her voice venomous. "You care about her money, you mean? That is what this is really about, is it not? You found a wealthy widow and decided to cash in." I gasped. "That is enough," My voice came out stronger than I expected. Walter is here because I love him, not because of money. He has his own resources. He does not need mine. Stephanie laughed bitterly. Love you barely know him. It has been what a year Dad has been gone, 5 years, and you have already moved on like he never mattered. My hands trembled. Your father will always matter. He was the love of my life for over 3 decades. But he is gone, Stephanie. He is not coming back. And I have every right to find happiness again. Stephanie's face contorted with rage. Happiness. You call this happiness? You are destroying everything. You are ruining Dad's memory. You are ruining this family. You are ruining everything he built. Brad tried again to calm her. Honey, please let us just go. But Stephanie was beyond reason now. Her eyes darted around the room and landed on a glass of red wine sitting on the side table. In one swift motion, she grabbed it. Time seemed to slow down. I saw her arm move, saw the wine arc through the air, and then I felt the cold liquid hit my face and chest. Red wine soaked into my hair, dripped down my forehead into my eyes. It splashed across the diamond necklace Walter had just given me and spread across the front of my red dress like a stain of blood. Gasps and shouts erupted around the room. Kyle lunged forward. Joan screamed. Walter grabbed a napkin and tried to wipe my face, but I just stood there frozen as wine dripped from my chin onto the carpet. Stephanie stood breathing hard, the empty glass still in her hand. You ruined everything, she screamed. I hate you. I hate what you have become. Brad grabbed her arm firmly this time and pulled her toward the door. We are leaving. Now. She fought against him for a moment, but then allowed herself to be dragged away. She looked back at me one last time. I will never forgive you for this, she spat. The front door slammed. The sound echoed through the house. For a moment, nobody moved. I stood there covered in wine, my carefully planned Christmas destroyed. Then Joan rushed over with a towel. Kyle stood nearby. His fists clenched, looking like he wanted to chase after his sister. Walter dabbed gently at my face with a napkin, his expression stricken. Addie, I am so sorry. I took the towel from Joan and wiped my eyes. Wine stung them, making them water. Or maybe those were tears. I could not tell. I looked around at my guests, at their shocked faces, at the ruined atmosphere of what was supposed to be a joyful day. Ethan and Sophie were crying in the other room. My beautiful dress was destroyed. The necklace was stained. Everything was ruined. But in that moment, standing there humiliated in my own home, something inside me crystallized. I felt the shock give way to clarity. I had tried everything with Stephanie. I had been patient, understanding, and accommodating. I had given her time and space. I had reached out repeatedly, and this was how she repaid me, by publicly humiliating me in front of my family and friends on Christmas Day, by screaming at me in front of her own children, by throwing wine in my face. I straightened my shoulders and looked at Walter. Excuse me for a moment, I said quietly. My voice was steady now. I walked upstairs to my bedroom, leaving wet footprints on the stairs. Behind me, I heard Joan say something to the other guests, her voice soothing, trying to salvage what was left of the gathering. But I was done trying to salvage anything. In my bedroom, I stood in front of the mirror. Wine covered my hair, face, and dress. I looked like I had been attacked, which in a way I had been. I stared at my reflection and felt something shift inside me. I had been willing to forgive so much, but there are lines that cannot be uncrossed. Stephanie had not just embarrassed me. She had shown a complete lack of respect for me as a person, as her mother, as someone deserving of basic human dignity. I carefully removed the necklace and set it on the dresser. Then I peeled off the wine-soaked dress and washed my face and hair in the bathroom sink. The red wine stained the white porcelain temporarily before swirling down the drain. I dried off and changed into a simple sweater and slacks. When I looked in the mirror again, I saw someone different, someone who had finally had enough. When I walked back downstairs, the house was quieter. Some guests had left understanding that the celebration was over, but Joan, Paul, Kyle, Hannah, and Walter remained in the living room. They looked up as I entered, concern etched on their faces. Kyle immediately stood. "Mum, are you okay?" I nodded. "I am fine, but I need to do something. Kyle, is Gregory still here?" Gregory was our family lawyer and a longtime friend. He had been at the party but had stepped outside during Stephanie's outburst. Kyle nodded. "He is on the back patio. I think he wanted to give you space." I walked through the kitchen to the sliding glass door. Gregory stood outside with his hands in his pockets, looking out at the yard. When he heard the door open, he turned. "Addie, I am so sorry about what happened." I joined him on the patio. The December air was cold against my still damp hair. "Gregory, I need you to do something for me. Today. Right now." He looked at me carefully, reading my expression. "What do you need?" I took a deep breath. "I want to remove Stephanie from my will, completely and permanently." Gregory's eyebrows rose. He started to speak, then stopped. Finally, he said, "Addie, I understand you are upset. That was an awful thing she did. But this is a major decision. Maybe you should wait a few days. Let emotions settle." I shook my head firmly. "No, I have never been more certain of anything. I will not leave my estate to someone who treats me with such contempt. I have tried everything with her. I have been patient and understanding, and this is what I get in return. She made her choice when she threw that wine in my face." Gregory studied me for a long moment. "If you are absolutely sure, I can draft a codicil to your will, but I need to do it properly. Do you have your current will accessible?" I nodded. "It is in my office upstairs. I will get it." I went inside, aware that everyone was watching me. I climbed the stairs, went to my home office, and unlocked the file cabinet where I kept important documents. I found the will and brought it back downstairs. By the time I returned to the living room, everyone had gathered there. Walter stood when he saw me carrying the document. "Addie, what are you doing?" I looked at him, then at the others. "I am removing Stephanie from my will. I want all of you to be here as witnesses." Joan gasped. "Addie, are you certain this is such a huge step?" Kyle looked torn. "Mum, I know you are angry. I am angry too. What she did was unforgivable. But is this really the answer?" I turned to face my son. "Kyle, I love your sister. I always will. But I will not be treated like this. I will not allow anyone, not even my own daughter, to disrespect me in such a vile way and then reward her with an inheritance. She needs to understand that actions have consequences." I looked around at everyone. This is not a rash decision. This is a boundary I should have set a long time ago. I handed the will to Gregory. He sat down at the dining room table and opened his laptop, which he had brought in from his car. The room was silent, except for the sound of his typing. For the next 30 minutes, Gregory drafted a codicil to my will, while the rest of us sat in uncomfortable silence. Joan made tea. Paul sat with his head in his hands. Kyle paced. Walter stood near me, not touching me, but present, supportive. Finally, Gregory looked up. "I have drafted the codicil. Let me read it to you." He cleared his throat and read aloud the legal language. In summary, it stated that Stephanie was being removed as a beneficiary of my estate. Her share, which had been 50%, would now go entirely to Kyle. Additionally, I was establishing separate trust funds for Ethan and Sophie to be managed by Kyle until they reached age 25. This ensured that my grandchildren would still be provided for, but Stephanie would have no access to or control over those funds. This is legally binding once you sign it in the presence of two witnesses, Gregory concluded. I took the papers from him and read through them carefully. Every word was clear. This was what I wanted. I picked up a pen. Who will witness? Kyle stepped forward. I will. Joan also stood. So will I. I signed my name at the bottom of the codicil. My hand was steady. Kyle signed next, his expression somber. Then Joan, who wiped a tear from her eye as she wrote her name. Gregory notarized the document and made copies. This is now legally binding, he said. Stephanie is no longer a beneficiary of your estate. Everything will go to Kyle with the exception of the trusts for your grandchildren. I took my phone out of my pocket. My hands did not shake as I opened the camera and took a clear photograph of the signed codicil. Then I opened my text messages and found Stephanie's name. I had not heard from her since she left. No apology, nothing. I typed a message. What you did today was unforgivable. I have removed you from my will. You are no longer welcome in my home until you can show respect. I hope one day you will understand why I had to do this. I attached the photo of the codicil and hit send. I placed my phone on the table face down. The room remained silent. Then Walter spoke quietly. I am proud of you. That took tremendous courage. Kyle came over and hugged me. I support you, Mum. What she did was wrong. You deserve better. Joan wiped her eyes. David would understand, Addie. He would not want you to be treated that way either. Paul nodded. You did the right thing. Tough love is still love. I felt a weight lift from my shoulders. I had spent months, years, even trying to appease Stephanie, walking on eggshells, hoping she would come around. But she had pushed me too far. And now finally I had taken control of my own life. I had set a boundary that could not be crossed. For the first time in a very long time, I felt free. The days following Christmas were strange. My phone remained silent. Stephanie did not respond to my text message. No apology came. No acknowledgement at all. Part of me had hoped that seeing the codicil, seeing that I was serious, would shock her into reality. But there was nothing. A week after Christmas, Brad called. His voice was subdued. Addie, I want to apologize for what happened. Stephanie was completely out of line. What she did was inexcusable. I appreciated his words. Thank you, Brad. I know this is difficult for you too. He sighed. She is humiliated, Addie. She did not think you would actually go through with changing your will. She thought it was an empty threat. I felt a flash of anger. It was not a threat, Brad. It was a consequence. And until she can genuinely apologize and show real change, my decision stands. Brad was quiet for a moment. I understand. I will talk to her, but I cannot promise anything. She is very stubborn. I softened slightly. I know. She gets that from me. But stubbornness does not excuse cruelty. We said goodbye, and I hung up feeling sad but resolute. Kyle came by often in those weeks. He told me Stephanie was avoiding everyone embarrassed by her behavior. Her friends had heard about the incident, small towns being what they are, and people were talking. Kyle said Stephanie was angry, but also ashamed. Give her time, Mum, he said. Maybe she will come around. I nodded. but I was not holding my breath. Walter and I continued with our lives. We went to dinner, attended a play, and spent New Year's Eve quietly together. He never once suggested I reconsider my decision about the will. He understood that what Stephanie had done was beyond the pale. In February, Walter and I began planning our wedding. We decided on a small ceremony in the spring with just close friends and family. Kyle and Hannah were excited to be part of it. Joan and Paul offered to help with arrangements. I did not invite Stephanie. It hurt not to include my daughter in such an important moment, but I could not pretend everything was fine. She had drawn a line in the sand, and so had I. I sent birth announcements when I legally changed my name to include Walter's, but I did not expect her to acknowledge them. And she did not. Spring came, and Walter and I were married in a beautiful garden ceremony. The sun shone brightly and flowers bloomed everywhere. Kyle walked me down the aisle. Joan cried happy tears. Paul gave a touching toast at the reception. It was a perfect day, surrounded by people who truly loved and supported us. But there was an empty space where Stephanie should have been, and I felt it acutely. Months passed. I stayed busy with volunteer work and spent time with Kyle, Hannah, and my friends. Walter and I traveled to the coast for a belated honeymoon. Life moved forward. But I thought about Stephanie often. I wondered about Ethan and Sophie, how much they had grown, what they were doing in school. I sent birthday cards and gifts, though I never received thank you notes. I had to accept that this was my reality now. I had a son who loved me, and a new husband who cherished me, but I had lost my daughter. Then one day in late summer, nearly 9 months after that terrible Christmas, my phone rang. It was an unknown number. I almost did not answer, but something made me pick up. Hello? There was a pause, and then a small voice. Mum. It was Stephanie. My heart clenched. Steph. She took a shaky breath. Mum, can we talk? We met at a neutral location, a coffee shop neither of us frequented. When I arrived, Stephanie was already there, sitting at a corner table. She looked thinner, older. Her eyes were red-rimmed. When she saw me, she stood awkwardly. We sat down across from each other. For a long moment, neither of us spoke. Finally, Stephanie broke the silence. Mum, I am so sorry. Her voice cracked. I am so sorry for what I did, for what I said, for everything. Tears spilled down her cheeks. I have been in therapy for months trying to understand why I reacted the way I did, and I realize now that I was not angry at you. I was angry at Dad for dying. I was angry at the world for taking him away. And I took it out on you because you were moving forward and I was stuck. I felt my own tears coming. Steph, I loved your father. I will always love him. But I could not stay frozen in grief forever. She nodded, wiping her face. I know that now. And Walter, he seems like a good man. I was horrible to him. I was horrible to you. You did not deserve any of it. I reached across the table and took her hand. I needed you to understand that I am still a person with my own needs and desires. I am not just your mother or Dad's widow. I am Addie, and I deserve respect and happiness. Stephanie squeezed my hand. I know, and I am so ashamed of how I treated you. Throwing that wine, saying those awful things, it was unforgivable. We talked for over an hour. Stephanie explained how the therapy had helped her process her grief in healthier ways. She admitted she had been holding on to her father so tightly that she could not let anyone else in. She apologized repeatedly, and I could see she meant it. This was not a surface apology. She had done real work on herself. But I also knew that one conversation could not erase everything that had happened. Steph, I appreciate your apology, truly, but I need to see sustained change. I need to know that you will treat Walter and me with respect going forward. She nodded. I understand. I will prove it to you, Mum. I promise. I told her about the will, that it had not changed back yet. Her face fell, but she did not argue. I understand, she said quietly. I earned that consequence. It has been over a year since that Christmas day, when my daughter threw wine in my face. People ask me if I regret what I did, removing her from my will, setting that hard boundary. My answer is always no. What happened that day was a turning point. Stephanie needed to learn that actions have consequences, that even family members must treat each other with basic respect. Since our conversation at the coffee shop, Stephanie has slowly rebuilt our relationship. She invited Walter and me to Ethan's birthday party, and she was genuinely kind to Walter. She asked about our honeymoon and complimented the photos I showed her. It was not perfect, but it was progress. She started coming to Sunday dinners again, and though there is still some awkwardness, we are healing. I have not changed my will back yet. Gregory advised me to wait to make sure the change in Stephanie is real and lasting. I agreed. Stephanie knows this and has not pushed. She told me she wants to earn back my trust, not demand it. That alone shows me how much she has grown. Perhaps one day, when enough time has passed and I am confident in her transformation, I will revisit the decision. But for now, the boundary remains. I learned something important through this painful experience. Loving someone does not mean accepting mistreatment. Being a mother does not mean sacrificing my own dignity and happiness to appease my children. I spent so long trying to keep everyone happy, trying to hold the family together, that I lost sight of my own worth. That Christmas day, covered in wine and humiliated in front of my loved ones, I finally saw clearly. I deserved better, and I had the power to demand it. Walter and I are happy. We travel, we garden together, we host dinners for friends. Kyle and Hannah visit often, and their relationship is thriving. Joan and Paul remain close, supportive presences in my life. My home is filled with love and laughter again, but on my terms. I no longer walk on eggshells or worry about upsetting someone by living my life. I am free to be myself, to love who I choose, to make decisions that honor my own needs. As for Stephanie, time will tell. I hope that one day we will be fully restored, that she will truly accept Walter as part of our family, and that we can look back on that terrible Christmas as the moment that forced necessary change. But even if that never fully happens, I know I did the right thing. I stood up for myself. I set a boundary. I refused to be treated with disrespect in my own home. And that decision, difficult as it was, has given me something invaluable. It has given me back my self-respect. Some people think I was too harsh. They say families should forgive everything, that blood is thicker than water. But I disagree. Families should be held to the highest standards of respect and kindness, not the lowest. Just because someone shares your DNA does not give them the right to abuse you. And forgiving someone does not mean allowing them to continue hurting you. Real forgiveness comes with changed behavior, with genuine remorse, with effort to do better. I married Walter last spring, surrounded by people who truly love and support us. The ceremony was beautiful, the reception joyful. And every day since I have been grateful I had the courage to choose my own happiness. David will always hold a place in my heart. The years we shared were precious and irreplaceable, but he would not have wanted me to spend the rest of my life alone and miserable. He would have wanted me to live fully, to love again, to find joy. I believe that with all my heart. So when people ask if I regret removing my daughter from my will, I tell them the truth. I regret that it became necessary. I regret the pain and division it caused, but I do not regret standing up for myself. I do not regret drawing a line and saying this far and no further. Sometimes the hardest gift you can give yourself is the gift of self-respect. And sometimes the most loving thing you can do for someone else is show them that their behavior is unacceptable and will not be tolerated. That Christmas day changed everything. It was the day I stopped being a doormat and became a person who values herself. It was the day I realized that being a good mother does not mean accepting cruelty from my children. It was the day I took back control of my own life. And for that, despite all the pain, I am grateful. Now I want to ask you something. Have you ever had to set a difficult boundary with someone you love? Have you ever been forced to choose between keeping the peace and keeping your self-respect? I would love to hear your thoughts in the comments below. Please take a moment to like this video. If my story resonated with you, and subscribe to this channel for more real stories about family love and the hard choices we sometimes have to make. Share this with someone who might need to hear it, someone who is struggling with a difficult family situation. Thank you so much for listening to my story. I hope it encourages you to value yourself and to know that you deserve respect always. May you find the courage to stand up for yourself when it matters most, and may you be surrounded by people who truly love and honor you. Take care, and until next time, remember that your happiness matters.